A lot will change in a month. A month from now, our small little town of Whitewater is going to grow by the thousands as students come in on the campus. A month from now, all anyone is going to be able to talk about is football, including me. In a month from now, summer is going to be over, and the kids are going to be in school. And a little bit more than a month from now, it's actually going to start getting chilly, and summer's going to be really over as you see the leaves turn. A lot can change in a month. Well, the same is true in 1446 BC, almost 3,500 years ago, when Israel escaped Egyptian slavery and went into the Promised Land. Right, Israel, there were slaves in Egypt being worked to death by their Egyptian overlords, and God uses Moses and the 10 plagues to free Israel from Egyptian slavery. And at the beginning of the month, there they were in front of the Red Sea, and Pharaoh and his army changed their mind that they were going to mow down the entire Israelite nation. And so God opens the Red Sea, he splits it apart, and then he lets them go through, and then Pharaoh and his army follow them to try to get them, and then God closes the sea on them, destroys them, and saves Israel. And at the beginning of the month, Israel and all the people are praising God. They're dancing for joy. They're singing. They're so happy. And a month later, their praising turns into weeping and grumbling and even death threats to Moses, saying, Moses, oh, you must want us to starve. Oh, God just brought us out here in this desert to kill us. Oh, we wish we were back in Egypt in slavery because we were surrounded by pots of meat, which, every time I read that in Exodus, I think, really? Were you? Really? But that's what they say, that they're delusional. A lot can change in a month. Yet God never changes. And nor does his love for his people. So even as they get ungrateful and they complain against him and dishonor him, forget everything that he's done for them and just refuse to trust him, God graciously sends his people daily bread in the form of manna. And so we're going to learn about the daily bread that God gave to his people in the desert. And we're going to learn about the daily bread that God gives to us. So just about the text, I think it's like we notice, first of all, understand that the journey from Egypt to what's modern day Israel, which was the promised land that these people were going to, the journey should only take a few months. Right? You just follow the coast of the Mediterranean Sea. It doesn't take that long. And yet God purposely directed Moses and the Israelites to go completely off course, down south into the Sinai desert. But why? Why would he put them in a place where there's no food, there's no water, there's no way to really feed yourself or your livestock, a place where it seems like you're going to die? Why wouldn't he just let them into the promised land right away? The short answer is this. They weren't ready for it. They weren't ready for it. They needed to learn to trust God. They needed to learn to put their faith in God alone. And so God is putting them in a situation where really they have no choice. They have no choice but to just trust God for everything. And so God is going to take care of them. He's going to sustain them with this miraculous bread from heaven. What it would have been like was this kind of resin that showed up on the ground on the desert floor with the morning dew. And it would have evaporated by the afternoon. So he gives them this food they collected, and you can make bread out of it. Now I wanted to notice this too. Not only does God give them this bread from heaven freely and graciously, but he also gives them the opportunity and the joy and the dignity of hard work, right? It's not that you just, drop loaves of bread into their baskets. No, you remember, it goes on the morning and then it goes away by the afternoon, so they have to get up early. And they have to work, and they have to collect it. And then they have to boil it or bake it, and then they have to distribute it among their family. God gives them not only this bread from heaven, but he also gives them the opportunity to work hard and to make that bread. And so both things, both the bread and the opportunity to work hard, both are gifts from God. And not only does God give them this bread from heaven, but he gives them an opportunity to show and grow and have faith in him. You notice he gives very specific directions and commands with this daily bread. Rule number 1, take what you need for today, no more, no less. Do not take more than you need. Do not try to save it overnight. But why is that so important? Well, you think about it. If you're an Israelite, it's one thing for you to say, oh yeah, I believe that God's going to take care of us. He said he would. That's great. And yeah, and he says that he's going to put manna on the ground for us to take every single morning. I believe that. Okay, prove it. Prove it. Don't take any more than what you need for today. Don't save anything left. No leftovers. Throw it away. If you really believe that God is going to give it to you tomorrow, okay, then prove that you believe that. Well, that's hard. Now, of course, God is faithful to his promises. Of course, when they just did what God told them to do, and they collected what they were supposed to collect, no one had too little, no one had too much. Everyone was satisfied. But you know how people get. They get skittish, and they get scared, and they get nervous, and think, well, oh, okay, well, maybe, you never know. Maybe, maybe that's not going to be it tomorrow morning. So I'm just going to save a little extra just in case. No, it doesn't work like that. You don't get to do that. And so when they save leftovers, well, it gets gross, it rots, and there's maggots, and it smells terrible. So rule number 2, on the night before the Sabbath, collect twice as much as you need, both for today and tomorrow. And on that night, it's not going to spoil. It's not going to spoil. And on the Sabbath day, don't go out looking for manna. Rest. Now that's an act of faith. Because, when God says, hey, I'm going to take care of you, don't work on the Sabbath, don't worry about it, I'll take care of you. Show that you trust me by not trying to collect manna on the Sabbath. Trust me. And the people kind of said, well, you never know. Oh, well, I know he says this, but you never really know. Well, that's a blasphemous statement. God says it. God said it. To say, well, you never really know. Well, you're saying you really can't trust your Father. This God that brought us out of Egypt, this God that saved us from the Egyptian army and led us through the Red Sea, well, you can't really trust him. That's blasphemy. And so some of the people go out on the Sabbath day to try to find manna just in case, and they embarrass themselves. They show that they really didn't trust it, and of course there's no manna out there because God said there wouldn't be any manna to collect. And so eventually they're forced to just listen to it. They're forced to obey, and when they do, things work well. God gives them everything they need. God takes care of them. He supports them and sustains them in the desert on their way to the promised land. And so there's 3 things that I think we can take out of this text. Number 1, embrace God's testing. Embrace God's testing. Number 2, don't be greedy with your manna. Don't be greedy with your daily bread. Rule number 3, be satisfied with the bread of life. Well, number 1, embrace God's testing. Before I say anything else, I want to make this clear. This happened. This happened. This thing that we read in Exodus, this is not just a cool story or a legend to teach us a higher truth about God. No, this is a history of God's chosen people. That's absolutely true. At the same time, what we see in Exodus is a really powerful picture and a really useful picture of our own journey of faith and our relationship with God. So in the same way that God frees his people from slavery and delivers them and sustains them in the desert until he brings them into the promised land, that's a really key picture for the way that God saves us and delivers us from our slavery to sin, death, and Satan, and sustains us in this desert of life until we reach the promised land of heaven. So there's a lot here that we can take and apply to ourselves. Now you notice, they weren't ready for the promised land yet. They weren't. Why not? Well, because even though God freed them from political, physical slavery, as we see in Exodus and Numbers and really the whole history of God's people, they were still very much enslaved in their hearts. They were enslaved to their lust. They were enslaved to their greed and their fear and their bitterness and their grumbling. They were still very much slaves to their own evil desires. And so it only took a moment for God to free them from political slavery, but it would take a longer time, little by little, to free the Israelites from the slavery of their hearts. In other words, it only took a moment for God to free his people from slavery, to take the Israelites out of slavery. It would take 40 years in the desert to take the slavery out of the Israelites. The same is true for you and me. Right? It only took a moment for God to free us from our punishment, from slavery to sin and death and hell. Right? When Jesus comes and he sacrifices himself in our place, he's punished in our place for everything that we've ever done, we can truly say we are free. We're free from the punishment of our sins. That's absolutely true. At the same time, a part of us, that sinful nature, is still very much enslaved to our lust and our greed and our anger and our envy and our jealousy and all the bad desires that we have. We're still, a part of us is still enslaved to that. And so God, before he takes us to the promised land, little by little, frees us from that kind of slavery. And he does it through hardship and testing and challenges, and by putting us in situations where we have no choice. We just need to trust him. We need to learn to trust him. And so there's going to be times in your life where God takes away someone or something away from you that you thought you could never live without, and God is saying, hey, trust him. Trust him. There's going to be times where God takes things away from you, or doesn't let you have things that you desperately want, and it seems like he doesn't care about you, and God is saying, hey, trust him. There's going to be times where God gives the things that you want to other people, and you have to look at it. And you know what? You might be right. They don't maybe deserve it as much as you, but they have and you don't. And God is saying, trust him. Trust him. God is going to put you in situations where you don't want to be, situations where you are not in control, places where you don't want to be. And God is saying, trust him. Trust him. Right? When you have hardships, when you are in a desert where you're not in control and things are difficult, don't look at it like a punishment from God, because God doesn't punish his people. All the punishment went on Jesus. And don't look at it as evidence that God somehow doesn't care. No, that's obviously not true. God is using this thing to free you from your internal slavery, to make you trust solely in him. Embrace the testing. Well, how do we do that? What's a specific way that we can do that? Well, part 2. Don't be greedy with your manna. Don't be greedy with your daily bread. What is daily bread? Well, as we read, the words that I read early in the service, that was from Martin Luther. And so he explains daily bread as everything that you need in this life to survive. So it's not just food and drink, it's property, home, a good spouse, children, a good family, good friends, good job, means of income, good property, everything you have, health, wealth, good government, good neighbors, good friends, just everything that you need to survive and thrive in this world. That is daily bread, including everything that you've learned. Everything that you learn. Now, I know maybe some of you are thinking, well, okay, but the money that I have in my bank, God didn't give me that. I earned it. Well, this job that I have, this position that I have, this thing that I have, I earned it. God didn't just give it to me. Yes and no. Yes and no. Yes, you're right. You did. That's absolutely true. But who gave you the abilities and the gifts and the opportunities and the people to notice your gifts, and all the things that had to happen for you to end up where you are? Who provided that for you? Right? Ultimately, everything that we have, even if we earned it, is an undeserved gift from God. Therefore, don't be greedy with your daily bread. Again, I probably don't have to convince you that it would be a sin against the daily bread principle if you took your paycheck and immediately gambled it away or blew it all on partying or drugs or alcohol. I probably don't have to convince you that that's a bad idea. But it is just as simple to hoard all of your blessings. It's just as simple to be greedy and say, well, this is mine, and this money is mine, and all these things are mine, and I need more, and more, and more. They shouldn't have that. They should have that. I need more. It's just as simple. Not because the daily bread, whatever that is, it could be money, it could be other things. It's not because those things are bad in and of themselves. It's because we put our ultimate trust and hope and faith in those things, in the gifts, not the giver. So think about this. Yeah, obviously being greedy with your money and wanting more and more and more, that's a sin against the daily bread. That's a sin against God. That's idolatry, right? That's hoarding your mammon. But it's also when we lie about ourselves to get ourselves a better reputation, a reputation that maybe God doesn't want to give us yet. That's also being greedy with your daily bread. We put other people down, or we cheat a little bit to get a little bit ahead in business. That's the same thing. That's being greedy with your daily bread. Whenever you are trying to get a blessing that God just hasn't given you yet, well, that's a sin against the daily bread. That's sin against God. When we're envious of other people and other people have what we want and say, well, they don't deserve that. I deserve that. That should be mine. And that's greed. That's not trusting God with your daily bread. And as you see here in Exodus 16, what happens when you hoard your daily bread? It tends to rot. All those things that you try to get without God's blessing, those things that you try to get for yourself that God didn't give you, they tend to rot. It tends to go bad. Or what happens is you tend to rot. You get worse. You become more greedy, more sinful, more conniving, more horrible to be around because it's all about you, and all you want is more and more and more, and nothing can ever truly satisfy you. So what's the answer? Well, contentment. Being content and happy and grateful with the things that you have and not constantly worrying about what you don't have. Just be okay with what God has given you. Godliness with contentment is a great day. Other people are going to have more than you. Other people are going to have things that you don't. That's okay. Be happy for them and be happy with what you have. How can we do that? How can we do that? That's a hard thing. How can we do that? Point number 3. Be satisfied with the bread of life. One of the things that we see here in Exodus is people going out to try to find manna where it's not there. It's not there. And what Jesus says here in John chapter 6 is really fascinating. He's saying deep down, all of us are like that. Right? He has this conversation with the Jews, and they say, well, prove that you are who you say you are. Give us bread from heaven, or give us some earthly gift to prove to us that you are who you say you are. You want to prove that you're truly the Son of God? Okay, then get rid of the tax collectors. Get rid of the Romans who were subjugating us. Give us a bunch of money. Give us some earthly gift to prove that you are who you say you are. And Jesus is saying, you are looking for manna in the wrong place. You are looking for satisfaction and fulfillment in the wrong place. Your deepest problem is not the Romans. It's not the government. It's not your money. It's not that you don't have enough. Your deepest problem is that you don't have me. Jesus says, I am the bread of life. And if you have me in your life, and if you know the love that I have for you, and you know the death that I am about to die for you so that you can have the joy and the pleasure of eternal life, if you truly understand the joy and the honor and the beauty and the immortality that you are going to have in the eternal promised land of heaven, then even if you are hungry and your stomach is rumbling, you will never be hungry. You will never be hungry. If you know me, then even as your well is dry, you'll never be thirsty. Even if you're poor and destitute and everyone looks down at you, you will be fuller and more satisfied than a king. That is what Jesus has to offer you. An identity, a status, a satisfaction that nothing else can truly give. He is the bread of life. And that enables you to be fully okay with what you have. You don't need more because you already have everything that you could ever want. Jesus is the bread of life. Now, I have one specific application before we end the sermon that I'd like to share with you. Part of the daily bread principle, part of knowing about God's daily bread and obeying God in regard to his daily bread is, as we see here, taking time and prioritizing resting in God's word and being fed by God in his house with his people. The Bible is very clear. Worshiping the Lord in his house with his people is not optional. It is a command. Not because God needs it, but because you do. We desperately need that rest. We desperately need that bread of life to fulfill us. And when we don't have that, we're going to try to find that fulfillment and that fullness in other things. When I talk to people that haven't been in worship, it's been several months or a year or several years. Very rarely, and maybe you've noticed this too, people don't typically say things like, well, I just don't believe in Jesus anymore. I don't think he's real. They don't literally say that. They say, well, I'm just so busy. I'm just so busy, and I just have so much going on. I got work, I got the kids, I'm tired from my job. I got so much to do on Sunday, so many things going on, I can't possibly do it. And they say, okay. But understand, whatever that thing is, that Sunday morning, that is your priority. You can't move that. That's everything revolves around that. That's probably your God. That's probably your actual daily bread. Your real bread of life that you are using as that bread that's truly satisfying your soul. And the question I'll ask is, how's it working? Is it working? When you slave away at your job just for a few more bucks, even on Sunday morning, is it worth it? Are you being filled? Is that satisfying you? The busyness of life and all those little things that you're doing, is it working? Is it worth it? Do you feel satisfied? Now, I know you're thinking, you're saying, well, yeah, Pastor, we know. That's why we're here. Of course we know that. You have to tell us that, of course, right? But chances are, you probably know someone who doesn't understand you. You probably know someone, probably a Christian, who is slaving away, trying to fill themselves with a bread that doesn't really satisfy them, whether it's the work, whether it's the kids, whether it's the business, whether it's leisure and rest. They're filling themselves with something, and it's not working. And I try to give you guys advice on how to talk to people about coming to church. Well, there's a lot of different ways to do it. One way that sometimes I do is I'll say, well, Jesus did this for you. You can't spare more than an hour for him. I kind of do that. And that's true. That's absolutely true. But here's maybe one thing I would say. I'd ask them, what are you hungry for? What are you trying to fill your soul? I'd ask them, is it worth it? And chances are it's not. Because money's a cruel God. It offers you satisfaction, but it never gives it. Rest and leisure are good things, but when that's all you do, eventually you get restless. Well, the kids, when you follow all the sports activities and everything that keeps you away from God's house, well, eventually that's fun, but it gets pretty draining pretty quick. Tell them about the bread of life. Tell them about the bread of life and what Jesus has to offer them that can truly satisfy them and make them whole. Amen.